The Creepy Corner presents Non Omnes Me Peribunt by Donna Cuttress. Tommy stared through the bedroom window at the garden. He felt, that beneath the surface, something was stirring. The soil shifted almost imperceptibly, leaving him feeling terrified. This bout of horticultural anxiety had started with the neighbors, Peter and Sandra's, complaints. He had to admit the garden at the front of the house was a mess. Trash bags had been tossed on top of junk piles, the garden stunk, and the neighbors had to keep their windows closed, not just because of the smell, but the flies that gathered in swarms. Tommy was used to the stench, although he did get a whiff of something putrid now and again, especially when the weather was hot. But he really couldn't be bothered clearing it all. They threatened to report him to the council. Even the postman had moaned about it, calling it the town dump, and threatened to telephone the animal protection people because he was sure something had died in there. After another argument with Peter, who had now taken to mowing his front lawn while wearing a mask, he had decided to capitulate. He thought, I'll tidy it up, but I'll make it the best garden for miles around, and shut Sandra and Peter up for good. The following morning, he removed the junk and trash bags ripped open by the local rat population and took them to the actual town dump. Admittedly, he liked the clear space in front of the house, but it just looked so bare. It was devoid of any color or greenery. So that afternoon, he searched out his local plant nursery. He wandered around, not really knowing what he was looking for, and randomly picked up a couple of trays of gaudy flowers, then joined the queue to pay. The cashier dropped his magazine he had been studying to serve the line waiting in front of him. It rolled onto the floor, landing at Tommy's feet, and flopped open at a certain page. Circled in red marker pen was an advertisement in the miscellaneous section. Looking for something unusual to grow? Something to make the neighbors weep with jealousy? Autumnal colors guaranteed. Contact us. P.S. It is nothing drug-related, so don't bother if that's what you're thinking. True horticulturists need only apply. He picked up the magazine, one he had never heard of, and tucked it into the back pocket of his jeans while the cashier was busy trying to get the credit card reader to work. Tommy sat in his van and reread the advertisement again. Impulsively, he made the decision. Yes. He wanted to piss off the neighbors with their perfect little patch of garden, straight flowers, and manicured lawn. He'd show them, and all the others who shook their heads as they passed his house, especially the snotty postman. He took out his phone and called the advertised number. Hello, yes? I'm interested in the plants for sale. Unusual, you say? Well, that sounds perfect. Would you like my address? Of course, let me just get my credit card out of my wallet. There was a paper bag on his doorstep in the morning. He looked around, feeling slightly uneasy, as though he was being watched, and not by Peter and Sandra. Someone had knocked hard on the front door. Groggily he had answered, but there was no one there, just the large brown paper bag. He examined it. His address was on it and his full name, including his middle, which he was sure he had not given. Across the top was a long Latin phrase, which he thought may have been the name of the plant. In large writing it said, "Soak before planting." He wondered how long for. Tommy filled the sink with lukewarm water and opened the bag. There were 3 bulbs, and they looked gnarly. Hairy roots poked out of one end, dead leaves out of the other. He sniffed them. They had a perfume he couldn't make out, but had smelled before. It made him sad for some reason. He emptied the bag into the water, remembering to take the dirty plates out first. The bulbs drank up the water in seconds. He let the tap run again. They drank that. The shell-like skin stretched. He thought they were going to split, but they didn't. They just sat there, in the bowl, wobbling slightly. They looked like they were breathing. He stepped away and closed the kitchen door on them, choosing to ignore them. After pruning and snipping the unruly hedges, he returned to the kitchen to get the bulbs. They looked different now. Normal. He poked some holes in the freshly cleared soil and dropped them in. He read out the Latin name again on the packet, squinting as he did. Non omnes me peribunt. Weird phrase, he thought, as the bag dissolved beneath his muddy fingers, as though it was made of rice paper. He planted the gaudy flowers from the trays either side of his path, washed his hands under the outdoor tap, climbed into his van, and left for work, pleased with his efforts. He waved to the neighbors peeking through the curtains. It was almost dark when he returned. The garden looked clear and the garbage smell had dissipated, to be replaced by one that had made him feel emotional. Tommy glanced at the neighbor's house. The windows were closed and the house was in darkness. He stared at his newly tended garden, proud of his efforts. He was sure he could see something poking through the soil, but knew it was much too soon for anything to grow since that morning. That night he dreamt he was sat cross-legged in the middle of the garden. His backside felt wet against the mud. He was paralyzed and watched, terrified, as a hand slowly began to push its way out of the soil. Its skin was mottled and blue-black in color, the nails thick with dirt. The fingers wiggled until they broke the surface. That is a dead person's hand, Tommy thought. Another slowly followed. He was sure he could hear voices, muffled cries from below. He could taste sweat from his upper lip, feel a cold fear down his back as the ground slowly began to open up beneath him. The whole flower bed seemed to slowly collapse as he fell backward. One hand pulled his hair, another squeezed his neck, then slowly reached across his face. He began crying out, making a pathetic howling sound as the hand covered his mouth. He breathed rapidly through his nose, panicking. He could smell death, maybe his own. Tommy woke up gasping for air, arms and legs flailing amongst the bed sheets. He went to the window and opened the blinds, hesitating at first, but he had to see the garden. He had to check on it and then get rid of them, things or whatever it was he had planted. The garden looked normal, sort of, just a bit churned, but he was sure something moved. He ran downstairs and outside. He began trying to dig the bulbs up, but he couldn't find them. The soil was empty. He dragged his fingers through the muck and found nothing. Yet when he stood back, he could see something. The soil moved. The smell of death was overwhelming. Tommy kicked at the soil, sending an arc of mud across the rest of the garden. His face went purple and he felt dizzy, as though his head was about to explode. He doused the ground with weed killer and boiling water, not caring if the neighbors saw, then wondered why they hadn't come outside to complain about his early morning shenanigans. He glanced at the neighbor's house. He had expected them to come scuttling out with their pointing fingers, but the house was still in darkness. Maybe they're avoiding me, he thought. He saw his reflection in the window. He looked crazed. He didn't blame them for staying away. He sat on the front steps, trying to calm down, and telephoned the plant nursery and spoke to the same woman he had previously. He begged her to tell him how to get rid of his newly acquired plants. She laughed, then informed him it was too late. They have been digested. They're your responsibility now. You can't dig them up. You've just got to wait. He asked her what he had to wait for, but she hung up the telephone. That's when he began to cry. Really ugly, snotty sobs. Weeks passed. Summer turned to autumn. Tommy let the hedges grow around his house again, not wanting to engage with anyone. The welcome chill in the air only made the death smell from the garden seem worse. On the first day of October, he noticed some shoots poking through the ground. Each day, the shoots grew larger until they became vines, which twisted around the garden. Tendrils reached out, leaves grew bigger with pin-pricked spikes protruding from the center. The garden scared him. The dark green mass would tremble as though something ran through it. Then he would hear a squeal. The rat population had definitely gone down in the area, and there were a lot of posters for missing cats appearing on lampposts. The postman left any letters at the end of the pathway, refusing to come up to the house. Tommy heard him mutter, "I almost missed the old dump." On the evening of Halloween, the garden seemed to be restless. As the sky darkened, a light frost settled, mist began to drift. He wondered if any kids would knock for a trick-or-treat, but knew they would not. The death stench would probably keep them away. In his loneliness, he wondered how Peter and Sandra were. He even missed the moaning postman. Tommy turned the volume down on the TV. He was sure he could hear talking from the front of the house. Were the kids going to knock? He felt elated and swung the door open, but there was no one there. The voices came from the garden.
Trick or treat!
Then laughing. Horrible scratching sounds that grated on the ears.
Trick or treat!
The leaves moved, disturbing the mist. Who's that? Who's out there? This is private property. Hesitantly, he stepped onto the garden, searching for the source of the voice. Who's there? Speak up! There was movement behind him as a vine wrapped itself around his legs, painfully tight, then pulled. He fell backward, cracking his head on the ground, and rolled slowly, moaning in pain, then stopped. Tommy was face to face with a pumpkin, a big, orange, warty pumpkin. Embedded in the thick skin was a face that was undoubtedly Sandra. Her eyes were open. Her mouth moved slowly as the pumpkin seeds and pulp spilled from her mouth.
Trick or treat, Tommy!
She screamed.
Yes, trick or treat. Trick or treat,
yelled another pumpkin about 6 feet away. Peter's face stared at them. The skin was smooth like a blister about to burst.
Lovely garden, Tommy. We had to pop over and see, didn't we, Sandra? Oh yes, we had to have a look when you went out. Then, the garden made us stay, dragged us down, made us sleep until we were allowed to wake up.
Tommy covered his mouth to stop a scream. The neighbors had been digested. Something moved further away from him.
Hello? Hello there? I'm going to be late for my deliveries.
Tommy crawled away through the foliage. His arms were shredded, his face sliced by thorns. He stopped when he saw a much smaller pumpkin. It was mottled and green, unripe, and it had the postman's face growing through it.
I came over to inquire what the neighbors were. They had a lot of posts clogging up their box. I walked up your path and just sort of got...
Digested, Tommy said. The postman pumpkin looked at him with watery eyes. Tommy covered him with some leaves and began crawling out of the garden wilderness. The vines tried to drag him backward, but he kicked and struggled until he eventually reached the stone path. He stood. He could hear them. Peter, Sandra, and the postman chattering away, crying and screaming until he couldn't stand it anymore. He ran to Peter and Sandra's garden shed and searched for the lawnmower. Thankfully, due to Peter's excellent maintenance skills, it still worked. Tommy dragged it back to his garden and went to work. The mower turned the garden into a green carpet of slaughtered vegetation. There were screams from the pumpkins as the blades came close. Eventually, Tommy dumped the lawnmower and returned with an axe. When he had finished slicing and dicing his neighbors and postman into little bits, he stood back, surveying the gored massacre. The garden was a botanical murder scene, and he had never felt so relieved. He went inside and collapsed onto the couch. He woke the next morning and remembered what he had done. Maybe it was a bad dream, he thought. I've had a breakdown and I'm just imagining everything. He went to the door and opened it. The garden was bare. No mess, no murders, just a front lawn which now looked more like no man's land. His relief was only a brief respite from his nightmare. The soil began to move, then stopped. Would he never be rid of these plants? What have I done? He shouted as he remembered what was on the paper bag. Non omnes me peribunt. Not all of me will die, he muttered, and sat on the front steps and began to cry. Non Omnes Me Peribunt was written by Donna Cuttress and narrated by Jillian Terwedo-Malsbury. The Creepy Corner is part of the Corner Theater podcast network from Straight to the Point Productions. It is creative directed by Annie McGrath and executive produced by Annie McGrath and Marisa Cooksey. Episodes are mixed and edited by Matt Keim. New Tales of Terror will be released every Tuesday and Friday throughout October. In the meantime, stay creepy.